Hi, this is Evan Summer, and I'm talking about my etching process, and I want to mention that etching is a very flexible medium. It can be done in a lot of different ways. It is done in a lot of different ways. What I'm going to be talking about is my way of doing it. I've been doing etchings for over 50 years, and my techniques, my way of working have developed along with my imagery to create something, but I want to make it very clear that there are many etchers who do things completely different, and there are many ways that work, and it depends on the kind of imagery you use, the type of person you are, how you like to work, how you like to approach a work. I'm working on a plate now. This is a continuation of the work on the plate that we printed the other day. And I've covered the plate with liquid hard ground, which has hardened into a very thin acid-resistant coat. And now I'm using an etching needle to draw through the acid resist, exposing the metal underneath so that it can be etched. The tools I use are typical etching tools. This is an etching needle. It's a carbide needle, but a steel needle is fine. You don't need carbide. I also like to use dental tools. They're steel, and the thing I like best about them is the grip. They're really made to be held, whereas some of the etching tools that you'll buy, like the twisted scribes, they look nice, but they're not good on your hands after a while. So I recommend that you get something that you can hold easily, like a dental tool. And if you have something that you can't hold easily, wrap it in tape like this so it'll be more comfortable for you. In addition, I use engraving tools, sometimes through the ground, and then etch the marks, sometimes directly on the plate. And I have a lot of different kinds of engraving tools. These GRS tools are really nice. These are standard EC Lions tools that I use for wider lines, for heavier lines. These groups of parallel lines will just become tone on the plate when it's printed. Of course, this is going to have to be etched, and what I'll do is etch different areas for different amounts of time, and that way I can vary the tone. There are several ways. The mark making is something that will allow you to vary tone, also the amount of time in the acid. Drawing parallel lines, which I often use to fill in spaces on my plates, and that's what I'm going to be doing here. I have a T-square set up at the edge of my drawing table, and I just work with it to get these close parallel lines, which will in effect become tone. I have tape along the edge of this plate. Part of that is to keep the plate in place. The other part is to keep this T-square raised just a little bit above the plate so that it doesn't mess up the ground and create problems by leaving bare spots of metal. So if I can just keep it up a tiny fraction of an inch, it'll allow it to move more easily and not interfere with the ground at all. Part of what I have to do now that I've drawn lines through the hard ground is to touch up places where I don't want it to etch. I'll use the liquid hard ground and just paint it on very carefully where I don't want any etching to occur. At the same time, I'm touching up and blocking out areas of the plate. I have to be careful to reinforce some of the lines that are already in the plate in dry point. These are going to become etched lines, so I draw them, redraw them with the etching needle through hard ground. And then I use a burnisher to try to reinforce that edge. I'll use a small brush to paint over the areas of ground that need to be covered up. Really here I'm trying to prevent any etching in those where those stray marks are or where I've overdrawn the lines. I'd like to get back to the plate now, and this is almost ready to put in the acid. But before I put it in the acid, I want to put some masking tape around the edges to further prevent any unwanted etching around the edges. Usually the ground is very thin at the edges, and it does tend to be a problem when it goes in the acid if it's not covered with masking tape. I leave about 1/4 inch of the plate all around the edge just for this purpose. I'm going to be etching the plate today with Dutch mordant, a combination of water, hydrochloric acid, and potassium chlorate. As you can see, I'm working under a hood with very good ventilation. This is considered hazardous, and a lot of schools don't use it anymore, but it's what I learned with, and I'm just more comfortable with it. I've also not had any health problems so far, but I still would say be very careful with handling and breathing all the chemicals in the print studio. The plate has to be completely covered. It doesn't need to be very deep. That looks good. I'm also going to cover it up even though it's under this vent hood. This plate's going to be etched several times before it's printed again, and what I did was to etch it for about 40 minutes. I'm going to take a look at that now. I'm going to clean off a couple areas, clean the ground off to see exactly how deep it's etched in that time, and then I'll be painting out with hard ground areas that I want to etch the least, and then once that dries I'll etch it again, and it'll be etched in steps like that until it's completely etched, and then it'll be ready for proofing again. I know some parts of it I want to etch just lightly, so I'll clean off the ground there to take a better look at this. I can also check the depth of the etching with an etching needle, actually feel it in those marks to see how deep they are. This looks good. It's about where it should be for this much etching, and my next step is to paint out and then repeat the process. After taking a proof, the next job is to do some touch-ups. A lot of times when I'm drawing with the needle through hard ground, I overdraw lines or I make some unwanted lines. Hopefully I get to paint them out with hard ground before etching. That way they won't etch, and these lines are just very faint dry point on the surface of the copper. So my next step here is to get rid of those with a burnisher. And it doesn't even involve a scraper, it doesn't involve a lot of work, but just burnishing out these unwanted lines will kind of clean up the plate. To do that, I'm going to put a little bit of oil on the plate and in the area that I want to burnish, and then I just use the burnisher. I'm going to just be working on the plate, pressing down with the burnisher, and these very faint marks are going to just be taken out. I can also use either very, very fine sandpaper or steel wool to help with this. Now that I've used the burnisher to touch up some unwanted marks, I'm ready to go back and reground the plate so that I can do more etching on it. The ground I use is a mixture of asphaltum thinned with turpentine, and I also add a little bit of burnt plate oil to it so it doesn't chip or get brittle at all. So I have this, and I change the thickness of it according to what I'm working on. For example, if you have a brand new plate, you can apply a very thin layer of ground and it'll cover the plate well. However, if the plate is etched, especially deeply etched, you need a thicker coat of ground to cover it as well. So I've got some etching on this. I have to cover it a little bit more thickly, and so I'll paint it on, and I'm going to, I've mixed this batch of ground up. I'll just pour a little on here and start brushing it out. My goal is to get a very smooth, even coat that'll allow me to etch into it well and draw into it with the needle, but have it sufficiently covered so I won't get any unwanted etching. To get a smoother coating, I'm going to brush in one direction and then perpendicular to that, and hopefully that will result in an even coating of ground over the whole plate, thick enough so that none of the copper plate shows through the ground. Once the plate is evenly coated with ground, you'll notice that you really can't see any of the marks already in the plate. But if this is just allowed to dry, and it'll probably take several hours, all the underlying etching and dry point and any marks on the plate really become visible through the hard ground. So you will see what's on the plate after letting it dry.